He woke up in a stranger's body. Skinny, childlike fingers, a chain around his wrists, the stench of blood and rotting flesh. And sitting across from him was a 3-meter-tall cannibal, debating aloud whether to devour him now or save him for the morning. Minjae twitched and realized. His hands wouldn't obey him. His wrists were bound with a chain. His left eye is swollen shut. Through his right eye, he sees brown sludge under his cheek and his own fingers. Thin, dirty, not his. His hands were broad, calloused from loading grips, but these belonged to a teenager on the brink of starvation. He lifts his head and sees the creature in its entirety. Greenish-gray, bumpy skin, a head the size of a barrel. The ogre is chewing on a human shin bone, and the sound is wet and crunchy. Horror washes over him like a wave, but Minjae doesn't shut down. In 27 years, he's learned one thing. Panic is just noise in your head that prevents you from thinking. And he needs to think, right now. He drops his head back into the mud and counts. One ogre is chewing. A chain runs from his wrists through an iron ring to a wooden post. The post is dug into the soggy clay. To his right, someone is snorting. On the left, a fire crackles. And voices. A low rumble unlike any language. But for some reason, he understands snippets. Whether the little one is dead or not. To eat now or in the morning. They're talking about him. Minjae closes his eyes and pretends to be dead. His heart is pounding so hard that the mud beneath him vibrates. The ground shudders. Hot, damp breath touches the back of his neck. The ogre is sniffing him. 1 second. 2. 5. The creature snorts and walks away. The game is still warm, so it'll go into the pot in the morning. In the morning. He has time. And then he notices the key thing. The ring isn't hammered into the post. It's slipped over the protrusion. Pull the post out, and the ring will slide off. He can't pull the post out himself. In this body, he doesn't have the strength to lift a sack of rice. But the ogre can. He just needs to make it lunge in the right direction. Minjae waits. The rain is getting heavier. One by one, the ogres retreat under the awning. Only one remains, the smallest one. A fang is knocked out, an ear is torn. The others growl at him. Even in a pack of man-eaters, there's a bottom of the barrel. And this one is at the bottom. Beaten down, angry, ready to pounce first if he senses weakness. Minjae recognizes this behavior, and he starts coughing. Quietly. Louder. Heart-wrenchingly. He pounds his chest against the ground. The small ogre raises its head. Minjae gets down on all fours and stares the creature straight in the yellow eyes. The whimpering turns into a sound like a challenge. The ogre slowly rises. Its nostrils flare. The prey dared to look up. It growls. Minjae doesn't look away. The ogre strides forward. Minjae crawls on his knees around the post, so that the post stands between him and the creature, so that a broken log with a sharp knot is behind him. The ogre picks up speed. Minjae grabs the chain and roars. Not a word. A pure animal scream. The beast crashes into the post, and the post flies out of the clay like a cork. The ring slips off. Minjae rolls to the side. The ogre rushes past and catches the log with his foot. 200 kilograms of flesh fly forward with the momentum of a freight car. A knot pierces the neck below the jaw. The creature roars and clutches its throat. Black blood gushes between its fingers. Minjae doesn't wait. He grabs a rock and jumps onto the wounded creature's back. A blow to the temple. A second. The bone bends. A third. The ogre goes limp. He strikes twice more because a problem left unfinished always returns. And then a line flashes before his eyes. Translucent. Blue. Target detected. Do you wish to steal? The roar of the other ogres is already close. The ground shakes. 10 seconds. He doesn't understand where the line came from or what to steal. But when there's only one door in front of you and 6 man-eaters behind you, you don't ask where it leads. You go in. Yes, I wish to. Heat hits his chest like boiling water on his ribs. Muscles he didn't feel a second ago fill with heaviness. A card unfolds before his eyes, as clear as a work order on a computer screen. An ogre's brute strength. Lowest rank. Affinity, 74%. Storage capacity, 12%. And in his head clicks. This isn't magic. It's an inventory card. It's merchandise. And he's just signed for it. 6 ogres are charging at him through the rain. Minjae stands up. His legs hold him. The body is foreign and small, but a foreign power hums inside. For a body that 5 minutes ago couldn't lift a stone, it's like putting a motor in a shopping cart. He doesn't fight. He runs. Past the awning, past the fire, into the darkness. Ogres roar behind him, but they are big and heavy, and he is small and light. They're breaking trees. He slips between the trunks. After 500 meters, the roar subsides. He runs until his legs give out, and he falls face first into the wet moss. Rain is pounding on his back. His hands are shaking. His palm is raw. He clenches the stranger's fingers into a fist. The system is flashing. Rough power of the fence. Assimilation in progress. 1 of 9 hours. Minjae squeezes into a niche between the roots of a huge tree. Any normal person would panic. He takes stock. What he has. A young, emaciated body. 1 stolen power. A system he doesn't understand but that works. A forest full of creatures that want to devour him. What he needs. Water. Food. Shelter. Information. He makes a priority list like a warehouse order. Survive the night. Find water. Find food. Figure out where he is. The plan is bad and short with no backup options. But a plan is better than nothing. And nothing is what he woke up with 20 minutes ago. The night passes in fits and starts. The forest is alive. Something howls in the distance. Nearby, branches crackle under heavy footsteps. Once, something enormous passes over his niche and showers him with debris. He holds his breath. The creature. Morning arrives, gray and wet. The system displays a cheerful message. Brute force of the fence. Assimilation complete. Skill active. He strikes the trunk with his palm and the bark cracks. From the hand that yesterday couldn't break a wet rope. It works. He walks down the slope. Water flows downward. Where there is water, there is life. An hour later, he finds a stream and drinks until his stomach aches. Then he looks for tracks. Not animal tracks, human ones. If the ogres had human prey, that means there are people here. 3 hours later, he finds a notch in a tree. Small. Neat. Made with a sharp object at human height. A trail. He follows the notches deeper into the forest and hears a scream. A furious, heart-wrenching scream of a person fighting for their life and losing. Minjae runs toward the sound. He bursts into a clearing. 2 ogres, smaller than the previous ones, youngsters. Between them on the ground is a woman with a sharpened stick. Clothes made of animal skins, blood on her face. She fights back, striking accurately and furiously at their capital and eyes. but one ogre has already grabbed her by the ankle and is dragging her away. The second one approaches from the right. Minjae's body screams to run. 2 ogres mean death. But he looks and assesses. Young, unarmed. One is busy with the prey, the other isn't looking his way. He grips the stone so tightly his knuckles turn white. One blow, to the temple of the one on the right, before the first one sees. He bursts from his spot. Brute force propels his scrawny body forward like a spring. 3 steps, a leap. The stone crashes into the ogre's temple with a crunch that makes her vision go dark. The creature falls like a sack. The ogre on the left turns and loosens his grip. The woman doesn't hesitate for a moment. A sharp stick pierces the ogre's eye up to the shoulder. The creature howls. Minjae is already nearby. Stone, temple, 1, 2, 3. 2 on the ground. The woman stands over her ogre, breathing heavily. Blood runs down the shaft into her palm. She turns to him. Young, sharp cheekbones, a scar across her left eyebrow. Her eyes are dark and frenzied. She does not look at him with gratitude, with suspicion and fury. Minjae raises his open palms and lowers the stone to the ground. Not an enemy. Her voice comes out hoarse and breaking. She doesn't lower the stick. She looks at the dead ogres, at his gaunt body, at his blood-stained hands. She asks sharply, "Who? Where from? Why is the blow so powerful for his size?" He answers slowly, choosing words he somehow knows. Escaped from the camp, alone, looking for people. She is silent for 10 seconds. Then she lowers her staff. She introduces herself, Cha Yuri, hunter, and she says that if he's lying, she'll kill him in his sleep. Minjae nods. That's enough. The system flashes. 2 new targets. Do you wish to steal? He drops to his knees by the nearest carcass. I do. The heat in his chest is weaker, more familiar, like a second box of the same goods on the same shelf. Keen sense of smell. Lowest rank. Capacity 23%. The second ogre gives him another. Thick hide. Capacity 34%. 3 skills. A third of the capacity. He stands up. In Yuri's eyes is the expression he's seen on newbies on their first day. Distrust, caution, and a tiny hope that it isn't as bad here as it is everywhere else. He promises nothing. He only says that together, their chances of surviving until evening are higher. Yuri nods briefly and walks forward along the path. Minjae follows her. A thought is already spinning in his head. 3 skills, 1/3 health, 6 ogres looking for him, a forest full of creatures, and a hunter ahead who could kill him in his sleep. This isn't a plan. It's the beginning of a plan, but a beginning is better than nothing. Yuri walked quickly. For someone who had just fought for her life, she moved as if nothing had happened. Her feet stepped precisely between the roots and stones. Not a single twig snapped. Minjae followed her, plowing through the undergrowth like a bear in a china shop. Every step he took echoed through the forest. Yuri stopped and turned around. Her face was stony, but something resembling contempt flashed in her eyes. She told him to step on the moss, not the dry leaves, and to follow right in her footsteps. Minjae nodded. He began to copy her steps. It was clumsy, but at least the crunching grew quieter. They walked for about an hour. The forest grew denser and denser. The trees here were so old that their trunks had grown together, forming walls. Yuri stopped at a crevice between 2 enormous roots. The crevice sloped downward at an angle. Inside it smelled of dampness and earth, but not rot. Yuri slipped inside and Minjae followed her. At the bottom was a burrow, a real burrow, belonging to some kind of animal. The ceiling was low, the walls were earthen but solid. Skins were piled in the corner. Nearby was a bundle of dried meat, a clay bowl of water, and another person. A woman was sitting by the far wall, and at the sight of Minjae she raised her hand. She was holding something. Not a weapon. A bone. A long, thin bone covered in fine scratches. She held it like a staff, and the tip glowed a dull green. Yuri quickly said that he was one of them, that he had killed 2 ogres. The woman didn't let go of the bone. She looked at Minjae, and he felt something run through his body. Not physically, deeper, as if someone had turned the pages of him from the inside. The woman frowned. Then she said slowly that there were 3 foreign seeds inside him, and that it was impossible. Minjae sat down on the ground because his legs were buckling, and because he could only stand in this hole by hunching over. He asked why it was impossible. The woman replied that devouring yields 1 seed. 1. The victor devours the heart of the vanquished and may gain their power, if they're lucky, if their kinship aligns. But inside this boy there are 3 seeds, and all 3 are active, and not a single one was obtained through devouring a heart. She could sense it. She introduced herself. Yun Sero, a shaman. Minjae looked at her. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes. Her hands were slender, but her fingers were long and precise. She looked like a surgeon after a 30-hour shift. She placed the bone staff on her lap, but her fingers rested on it, ready to act. Minjae decided to take a chance. He said he had the ability to steal power through direct victory, that he saw skills as records, that each record had stats and a learning time, and that his body had a limit to how much he could hold. Yuri and Seru exchanged glances. Yuri said he was either insane or lying. Seru said quietly that he wasn't lying. She sensed the seeds inside him. 3. All 3 were foreign. All 3 were integrated, not devoured. It was something else, not devouring. Something she had never encountered before. Minjae seized the moment. He asked where they were, what kind of world this was, what the rules were here. Seru answered reluctantly, but Yuri turned out to be more talkative when it came to practical matters. From their story, Minjae pieced together a picture. The wildlands. A world ruled by devouring. Monsters devour monsters and grow stronger. At the top are the 9 Great Fangs, ancient creatures that hold their territories and don't let anyone rise above them. Humans at the very bottom. Weak prey. Meat without valuable seed. Tribes are dying out. Faster in winter, slower in summer. But they're dying out. Yuri and Seru were from different tribes. Both tribes have been wiped out. Yuri lost her people when a clan of ogres organized a hunt for humans for entertainment. Seru lost hers differently. Her tribe asked a powerful clan of lizards for protection. The lizards agreed. The price was 10 people per season for food. When Seru told the elders she could find another way, they called her a weak shaman and ordered her to be silent. She left. A month later, the lizards raised the price. Then again. Then the tribe was gone. Minjae listened, and a plan began to form in his mind. Not an emotional one, but a logistical one. Problem number 1. Humans are at the bottom of the food chain because they cannot evolve through devouring. No strong seeds, no kinship, no chance of rising. Problem number 2. Even if a person gains strength, they're alone against the system. One strong person is just more delicious game. Problem number 3. The Great Fangs won't let anyone rise. They crush anyone who approaches their level. Stagnation. A monopoly at the top. Minjae knew this structure. He'd seen it in business. The big players control the market. The small ones die out. No one invests in logistics because everyone thinks power is about one big blow, not a delivery system. He asked Seru if it was possible to transfer the seed to another person, not through devouring, but some other way. Seru fell silent. Then she said that, theoretically, shamans could perform a blood seal ritual to transfer part of the power from one to another. But that required a living seed, not a devoured one, and immense control. And she had never done it. She had only been taught the basics. Minjae nodded. Theoretically possible, practically untested. But possible. That was the main thing. If he could steal power, and if there was a way to transfer it to others, then he wasn't just a fighter. He was a distribution hub. He was a warehouse. He was the one who received the goods and delivered them to various locations. The entire system of the wildlands operated on the principle that power flows upward. The strong devour the weak and become even stronger. A pyramid. Minjae had worked with supply pyramids his whole life. He knew their weak spot. The pyramid collapses when someone starts distributing resources bypassing the hierarchy. He didn't say this out loud. It was too soon. He didn't even dare to put it into words for himself. For now, he was just a boy with 3 low-level skills, holed up in a den with 2 women who didn't trust him. But the thought took root, and he began to calculate. Voice, he said something else. He said he needed to get stronger, fast, and that to do that, he needed a hunter who knew the forest and a shaman who understood seeds. Yuri asked why she should help him. Minjae answered simply, because alone she might survive a month. Together with Seru, maybe 2. And if he could gather power, and if Seru helped her absorb it, and if Yuri found targets, then the 3 of them would have a chance not just to survive, but to start rising up. Yuri was silent for a long time. Then she said that if he turned out to be useless, she would take his supplies and leave. Minjae said that was fair. Seru said nothing, but she didn't object either. It wasn't an order. It was a truce between 3 people who had no better options left. Minjae lay down on the hides and closed his eyes. His body ached. The absorbed power of the ogre hummed in his muscles, strangely and heavily. But his mind was working. He was making a plan. First cycle, reconnaissance. Find out what creatures live within a day's journey. Map the area. Identify weak loners. Second cycle, hunting. Targeted battles with creatures he can defeat at his current level. Skill theft, assimilation. Third cycle, growth. Every stolen skill must lead to the next goal. Not random loot, but a structured chain. He fell asleep with this list in his head and woke up to Yuri shaking his shoulder. Morning. Yuri said briefly that she had found tracks. A creature. A loner. Minjae got up. Everything ached, but the system showed all 3 skills in green. Active and mastered. Brute strength. Heightened sense of smell. Tough hide. He followed Yuri out of the burrow. Seru stayed inside. She said she would prepare ointments for treating wounds. Practical. Minjae approved silently. Yuri led him through the forest for 2 hours. This time he tried to tread more quietly, and it worked a little better. His heightened sense of smell was working. He could detect scents he hadn't noticed yesterday. Wet pine needles, mushrooms. Something heavy and musky, animal-like, to the left behind the bushes. Yuri pointed. There. Minjae parted the branches and saw it. A creature the size of a large boar. 6 legs. Armor made of bone plates. A short tail with a spike. It was digging into the ground with its fangs and gnawing on roots. Minjae took a closer look. The system flashed. Armored stag beetle. Rank, low plus. Skill, bone armor. Affinity with the wearer. No data until victory. Lowest plus. A step above those ogres. But there's only one of them, and it's busy eating. Minjae looked at Yuri. She was sizing up the creature with a narrowed gaze, and it was clear she wasn't doing this for the first time. She said quietly that the horned beast had a weak spot under its jaw. The armor doesn't cover the throat from below. But getting there is difficult because the creature spins quickly, and its tail spike pierces bone. Minjae nodded. He looked at the creature and thought. Brute strength would give him the power of a strike. Thick hide would provide some protection if the creature got to him. A keen sense of smell is useless in combat. Tactics are needed, not strength. The horned beast spins, so he needs to make it spin the wrong way. He looked around. 2 trees stood close together. The gap between the trunks was just wider than the horned beast's body. If he drove it in there, it would get stuck for a second or two. Its armor would press against the trunks. It wouldn't be able to spin. Its throat would be exposed. Minjae explained his plan to Yuri in 5 sentences. She listened, and the break on her face changed. Not admiration, but something close to respect. Or at least an acknowledgement that she wasn't dealing with an idiot. She nodded. They went their separate ways. Yuri approached from the left. Minjae picked up a rock and came out from the right. It was open. The horned beast raised its snout. Its small eyes stared at Minjae. He threw the rock, not at the beast, into the ground in front of it. The creature twitched and snorted. Minjae screamed and waved his arms. The horned beast lowered its head. Its bony forehead was like a battering ram. Its 6 legs tensed. It lunged at Minjae. Minjae ran, not away from the horned beast, toward the trees, past the trunks. Between them, he slipped through. The horned beast charged after him and came to a halt. Its shell was wedged against the trees on both sides. The creature roared and twitched. Yuri was already there. The stick went under its jaw, deep. The horned beast wheezed. Minjae turned and struck its bony forehead with a rock. Once. Twice. The creature slumped. Yuri pressed down on the stick with all her weight. Minjae struck. On the 5th blow, the stag fell silent. System. Target detected. Do you wish to steal? I do. Card. Bone armor. Rank. Low plus. Affinity. 69%. Storage capacity. 46%. Minjae exhaled. Almost half the capacity. 4 skills. Yuri pulled the stick out of the carcass and wiped it on the moss. She looked at Minjae, and for the first time ever, he saw something other than wariness on her face. She said the plan wasn't bad. From her tone, it was clear that for her, this was the highest praise. They butchered the carcass. Yuri worked with the knife she happened to have on her. A fragment of something larger. The blade had been worn down almost to the spine. Minjae watched as she cut the meat and skinned the carcass, and saw a master who had been given the worst tool possible. He took note. A knife. He needed a proper knife. No. She needs a proper blade. One that fits her hand. One that fits her style. They returned to the burrow with the meat and the horned beast's hide. Saru examined Minjae. The bone in her hand was glowing green again. She said the fourth seed had taken root well. There was no conflict. But the capacity was filling up quickly, and if he continued at this pace, after 5 to 6 thefts, problems would begin. Minjae asked what kind of problems. Saru replied calmly. His body would begin to mutate. The foreign seeds would change him, his skin, his bones, his muscles. Then, his brain. He would cease to be human. First on the outside, then on the inside. Minjae was silent. This was a limitation, a serious one. Fatal if ignored. But limitations exist to be factored into calculations, not to be feared. He asked if it was possible to lighten the load, to give part of the stolen goods to someone else. Saru looked up. She stared at him for a long time. Then she said that the blood seal could theoretically do that. But she doesn't know the entire ritual, only fragments. And she needed a focuser, which she didn't have. Her bone staff was too weak to transfer the seed. Minjae nodded. Another task for the list. Find or create a focuser. Help Saru restore the ritual. Open a channel for power transfer. That was the #1 strategic goal, because without it, he'd hit a wall after a few fights and start losing himself. And with it, he'd become not a fighter, but a system, a supply hub that receives and distributes. His thoughts returned to the stag meat Yuri was roasting over a tiny fire at the entrance to the burrow. Smoke rose through a crack between the roots. Minjae ate and felt his body soak up every bite. This body was hungry. Hungry for a long time, and seriously so. He ate his portion and stopped, even though he wanted more. Save some. Always save some. Yuri ate greedily and quickly. Saru ate slowly and carefully. They sat in a small burrow beneath the roots of a giant tree and ate the meat of the creature they had killed together. It wasn't a home. It was a hole in the ground. But there were 3 living people in it with full bellies, and that was more than any of them had had yesterday. Minjae finished eating. He wiped his hands on the moss and said that tomorrow they would go hunting again, but not at random. He asked Yuri to tell him everything she knew about the creatures in this forest. Sizes, habits, territories, weak spots. Yuri knew the forest as well as Minjae knew his warehouse. Every trail, every watering hole, every burrow. In 2 days, she dumped so much information on him that he could barely keep it all straight. Within a half-day's march, 4 species of creatures lived. Armored stag beetles, which they had already fought. Small-tailed lizards resembling dog-sized lizards. Poisonous, but fragile. Swamp toads in the lowlands to the south, big and slow. Their armor is weak, but the poison on their skin burns to the bone. And the 4th species, shadow wolves. Yuri spoke briefly about them. Don't mess with them. Minjae asked why. Yuri replied that shadow wolves hunt in packs, 10 to 15 of them. Fast, coordinated. And the leader has a skill. Shadow step. Instantaneous movement over short distances through shadows. That was a rank higher. Significantly higher. Minjae noted it in his mind. Shadow step. That's what he needs. A mobility skill. With his skinny body and 3 low-level skills, the only thing keeping him alive is tactics. But tactics are useless if you can't get to the right spot at the right time. Shadow Step solves that problem. But the pack, 15 wolves, he can't handle it. Not yet. Minjae put that goal aside and focused on the next step. Tail stabbers. Weak loners with poison. If he stole the poison, he'd gain a weapon he didn't have. A ranged threat. Or at least the ability to poison his blade. They went out hunting in the morning. Seru stayed behind in the den again. She was working on something. Grinding stag antlers into powder and mixing them with herbs. Minjae didn't ask. He trusted the expert to do her job. They found the first tail stinger quickly. The lizard was basking on a rock by the stream. It was the size of a large spaniel. Its scales shimmered a swampy green. Its tail was long and thin, with a bony spike at the end. Minjae approached from downwind. His keen sense of smell helped. He could sense the creature, the sour stench of poison, the warm, musky scent of its body. When he was 5 paces away, the tail snapper jerked. Quickly. Very quickly. The tail lashed through the air like a whip. Minjae flinched, and the spike passed a centimeter from his face. Brute force pushed him forward. He grabbed the creature by the scruff of its neck. The tough hide on his hands withstood the bite of teeth that were small but sharp as needles. One motion. A stone to the skull. The tail whipper went limp. You wish to steal. I wish. A poisonous barb. Lowest rank. Affinity 71%. Capacity 53%. Minjae felt something warm trickle down his right arm. He looked down. Small bumps had appeared on his skin. Scales. Tiny ones. Barely noticeable. But they were there. The first sign of mutation. Capacity at half, and the body begins to change shape. He clenched his teeth. Yuri noticed. Her eyes widened. She said he had scales on his arm. Minjae said he knew, and that it was temporary. He wasn't sure, but panicking wouldn't help. They killed 2 more tailbiters that day. Minjae didn't steal from both of them. He chose one. The second one had worse skills and a lower affinity. For the first time, he consciously turned down the loot. Not because he didn't want it, because the math showed that capacity was more important than greed. 6th skill. Acidic slime. Lowest rank. Capacity 64%. The scales on his right hand became more noticeable. His left hand was still clear. When they returned to the burrow, Seru took his hand and stared at the scales for a long time. Then, she said the process had begun and that there was only one way to reverse it. Transfer part of the seeds. Reduce the capacity to below half. Minjae asked directly, "The blood seal, can she do it or not?" Seru was silent. Then she said she needed a focuser. A real one. Not this bone. The bone is too weak. She needs something grown from the seed of a powerful creature. Processed. Attuned to her. Minjae nodded. What kind of creature was needed? Seru thought. She said that the seed of a creature with a high affinity for spiritual energy would be best. Not brute strength. Not armor. Something subtle. Yuri said one word. Misty deer. Minjae turned to her. Yuri explained. Misty deer live deep in the forest, solitary, timid, not dangerous in battle. But their seed carries the skill of mist, the ability to dissolve into the morning mist and become nearly invisible. It is a spiritual skill, The rank is low, but the nature is suitable. The problem is that a mist deer is nearly impossible to find. It senses a hunter from hundreds of paces away and vanishes. Minjae smiled. For the first time in 3 days in this world. He said he had a keen sense of smell. Yuri looked at him. Then she nodded slowly. The next day they went deep into the forest, further than Yuri had ever gone alone. She admitted she hadn't ventured beyond that boundary. Too dangerous for a loner. Minjae said there were 2 of them, and that it was mathematically better. Yuri snorted and said that math doesn't stop claws. The forest beyond the border was different, quieter, more ancient. The trees here were so thick that you could pitch a tent in their hollows. The moss on the trunks glowed with a faint bluish light. The air was thicker and smelled of something floral and heavy. Minjae turned his sense of smell up to full. The scents crashed over him in a wave. Dozens. Hundreds. He could sense every creature within range. Tail spinners, mycelium of something living underground, something large and hot far to the north. And one scent. Light. Cold. Like morning dew on glass. He was following that scent. Yuri moved beside him, and her silence had changed. Not hostile. Functional. They were hunters on the same trail, and that was the one thing Yuri understood and respected without words. The scent grew stronger. Minjae slowed down. He raised his hand. Yuri froze. Ahead among the trees stood a creature. A misty deer. Minjae saw it and couldn't believe his eyes. It was beautiful. Slender legs, a silvery gray coat, antlers branched and translucent, like glass, or like ice. Fog was indeed swirling around it, thin and shifting. The deer stood sideways, eating something from a lower branch. Minjae assessed the situation. The creature wasn't aggressive, fragile, but if it sensed him, it would vanish. He was standing downwind, but the wind could shift at any moment. He couldn't run toward it. The deer was faster. He could throw a stone, but if he missed, there would be no second chance. Minjae thought, and he came up with a plan. He turned to Yuri and whispered that he needed her to approach from the opposite side, far away, so that the deer wouldn't catch the scent, and to wait. When the deer ran away from Minjae, it would run away from the scent, toward Yuri. Yuri shook her head. She said the deer wouldn't run in a straight line. It would disappear into the fog. Minjae said he'd taken that into account. The deer disappears into the fog. But the fog has a scent too, and a keen sense of smell can detect it even when the eyes can't see. He'll chase the deer by scent. And Yuri needs to wait at a narrow pass between the rocks 500 paces to the east. They had passed it on the road. Yuri was silent. Then she nodded and left, silently. Minjae waited. For a long time. He counted the time by his heartbeats. When he decided Yuri was in position, he moved. Quietly. A step. Another step. The deer raised its head. Its nostrils flared. Minjae froze. The deer went back to eating. 3 more steps. The deer twitched. It looked straight at him and vanished. Its body turned transparent. Its contours blurred. Fog thickened where he had been standing, and a second later, there was nothing there. But Minjae could sense it. A cold, faint scent was moving, fast, toward the east. toward the cliffs. Minjae ran, not after the deer, parallel to it. He held on to the scent like a thread and ran through the undergrowth, snapping branches and making noise on purpose. The deer sped up. Minjae sped up too. Raw power propelled his body forward, and he flew through the forest as he had never run in his life. The scent turned toward the cliffs. Minjae burst into a clearing and saw a narrow passage between two stone walls. Fog was being sucked into the passage. The deer was running there. Invisible, but... And there stood Yuri, with a stick. Minjae screamed. Yuri struck, blindly, into the fog. The stick hit something soft. The deer materialized, on its side, the stick in its ribs. Minjae was there 3 seconds later. A rock, a blow. The deer wheezed and its silvery eyes went dark. Minjae stood over it, breathing heavily, and he felt something strange. Not triumph. Regret. The creature was beautiful and harmless. It was simply living. But Minjae needed its seed, not for himself, for Seru, for the focuser who would allow the power to be transferred, for the system that would save people. He said quietly, "I'm sorry." And then, "I wish to steal. Card. Missed skill. Rank, low plus. Affinity, 44%. Low affinity. The skill didn't take well. But capacity, 76%. Minjae looked at his hands. Scales had spread across both palms. On his right forearm, the skin had darkened and become rough. The nails on his left hand had changed shape. They had grown thicker, slightly curved. Claws. The beginnings of claws. Yuri looked at his hands, and her face was pale. Minjae clenched his fists. He hid his hands. He said they needed to go back, quickly. The two of them carried the deer carcass together. Minjae cut off the antlers separately and carried them carefully. Translucent glass branches. Material for the focuser. When they reached the burrow, Seru saw the carcass and her eyes widened. Then she saw Minjae's hands, and her eyes widened even more. She grabbed his wrist, and the bone in her hand glowed brighter than usual. She said the capacity was critical. One more theft, and the mutation would spread to his brain. He would start losing his thoughts. First, the abstract ones, then the concrete ones. Then his name. Minjae didn't flinch. He took out the deer antler and placed it in front of Seru. He said he needed a focuser. Made from this. Right now. Because he couldn't wait. Seru took the antler. She turned it over in her hands. She closed her eyes. Her fingers slid over the surface, and the material responded. A faint glow ran the entire length of the antler. Seru opened her eyes, and in them was something Minjae hadn't seen before. She said the material was alive, responsive, the best thing she'd ever held. But she needed time. Minjae asked how long. Seru said a day, maybe 2. Minjae nodded. He could wait 2 days. 2 days without hunting. 2 days at 76% capacity, with scales on his hands and claws on his fingers. He sat down against the wall and closed his eyes. In his head, he went over everything. 7 skills. Brute strength, keen sense of smell, tough hide, bone armor, poisonous spike, acidic slime, mist skill. All lower or lower plus rank. 76% capacity. Critical. He needs to unload at least 50 to stop the mutation. That means transferring about a quarter of what he's accumulated. To whom? Yuri. She's a fighter. She needs strength. Or tough hide. Or both. But the blood seal is Seru's business. And the focuser. And a ritual Seru has never performed before. Too many unknowns. At the warehouse, Minjae hated unknowns. But at the warehouse, he worked with boxes, not with magical seeds inside a human body. Yuri sat down next to him, silently. She looked at his hands. Then she said quietly that she had seen the mutation before. A hunter from her tribe had found a wyvern's corpse and eaten the seed. A week later, he stopped speaking. After 2 weeks, his body was completely covered in scales. After 3, he attacked his own daughter. They killed him. Minjae listened. Then he said he had a plan and that he wasn't going to lose his mind. Yuri replied that the hunter had said the same thing. Minjae remained silent because he had no defense. But he knew the difference. That hunter had gorged himself blindly. Minjae believed that those who act blindly lose everything. Those who act with calculation lose less. 2 days in the burrow. Seru worked on the focuser. She cut and polished the horn with a stone. She inscribed symbols with something red. Blood. Her own blood. She pricked her finger and drew. The lines were thin and precise. Each one had meaning. Minjae didn't interfere. He watched and remained silent. The specialist is working. Don't get in the way. Yuri went out on reconnaissance and brought back food. Small game, similar to rabbits but with 3 pairs of ears. Edible. Minjae helped with butchering and cooking. His scaly hands worked awkwardly. His fingers had become less sensitive. The claws got in the way. He noticed every change and committed it to memory. Right hand mutation, stage 2. Tactile sensitivity reduced by 30%. Grip altered. Finger mobility minus 20. He was taking inventory of his own body, like goods in a warehouse. Because if you stop counting, you'll stop noticing. And if you stop noticing, one day you'll look into a puddle and see a face that isn't your own. On the second night, Seru called him. The focuser was ready. A long, thin staff made of deer antler, semi-translucent, with red lines of symbols that pulsed like veins. Seru held it with both hands, and the staff glowed. Not dimly like before, steady and strong, with a warm, silvery light. Seru said she was ready to try the blood seal, but she didn't know if it would work. She had never done this before, and the ritual might go wrong. Minjae asked what she meant by go wrong. Seru honestly. The seed might not transfer, but instead shatter. He would lose the skill, but the capacity wouldn't be freed up. The debris would remain inside. Or the seed would transfer, but harm the one it was passed to. Or kill them. Yuri listened to all this and said she was ready. Minjae and Seru turned to her. Yuri stood up straight, arms at her sides, chin lifted. She said that if this ritual worked, she needed the power to hunt better, and that she wasn't afraid. Minjae looked into her eyes, then he nodded. He chose a skill. The brute strength of an ogre, the first one stolen, the lowest rank, the safest to transfer. Seru ordered them both to sit facing each other. She stood between them with her staff. She pressed the staff against Minjae's chest. Heat. Familiar. 3 skills were transferred over the next 4 days. Brute strength went to Yuri. Tough skin went to Yuri as well. She struck harder. She moved with greater confidence. Her skin had become thicker. Not visibly, but Minjae saw how a branch lashed her arm and left no mark. Before, it would have left a cut. The heightened sense of smell went to Seru. Minjae gave it to her consciously. A shaman must sense the seeds and herbs more subtly. She needs the sense of smell more than he does. His capacity dropped to 41%. The scales on his hands disappeared. His claws reverted to fingernails. Minjae looked at his palms and saw human skin for the first time in a week. Thin and dirty, but human. He had 4 skills left. Bone armor, poisonous thorn, acidic slime, fog skill. Not an ideal set, but it worked. Armor for defense, spikes and slime for attack, fog for retreat. A fighter's basic kit. And now the most important part. He had a team with distributed resources. Yuri was the strike force, fast, strong, with thick skin that could withstand minor blows. Seru was the sensor and the logistician. She sensed creatures from a distance, read their seeds, determined kinship before battle, and could perform blood seals. Minjae was the center, the one who steals and distributes, the one who plans. 3 people, a burrow beneath the roots, a handful of basic skills. But it was a system. Not 3 loners, but a system. And systems scale. Minjae gathered them for a council, their first real council. He said they needed a new target, not just a creature to hunt, a strategic target, something that would change their situation. Yuri asked what he meant. Minjae explained. They kill low-level creatures. That gives them skills. But low-rank skills, a ceiling. To grow further, they need to hunt creatures of a higher rank. And for that, they need preparation, reconnaissance, knowledge, a specific target. Yuri was silent. Then she said that to the west of the forest there were hills. An ogre chieftain lived in the hills. Not a small youngster, an old ogre, a big one, 4 meters tall, with a special ability. She didn't know exactly what it was, but the hills were his territory, and the small ogres roaming the forest were his subordinates. The very same ogres from the encampment where Minjae was a slave. Minjae assessed the situation. An ogre chieftain. He was the boss of the area, the one who controlled the territory. If they killed him, the lesser ogres would lose their coordination and scatter. The territory would be cleared. It would become safer not only for them, but for anyone else in the area. And the leader's skill would be higher in rank, possibly significantly higher. Minjae said that the leader was their target. Yuri raised an eyebrow. Seru looked at him with an expression that said he had lost his mind. Minjae said he wasn't going to go after the leader tomorrow. He was going to prepare, systematically, step by step. First, reconnaissance, then resources, then a plan, then execution. He asked Yuri to tell him everything about the leader. Yuri spoke. The hills to the west. 2 days' march. The leader lives in a stone cave at the top of the main hill. 4 or 5 large ogres are constantly on guard around him. Smaller ones roam the territory. In total, he controls 20 to 30 of them. The leader doesn't leave the cave without a reason. He's lazy, fat. But when he does come out, the ground literally shakes. Yuri saw him once from a distance. He crushed a young horned ogre with a single blow, and the ogre didn't even flinch. Minjae listened and mapped it out in his head. 30 ogres, 4 or 5 elite ones, 1 leader, a cave hills. He couldn't handle a frontal assault. Not now. Maybe never. 30 ogres is an army, and he has 2 fighters and a shaman. So no attack. So something else. He thought for 3 days. Hunted small game along the way. He killed 2 more tail spinners and 1 swamp toad. He took the poison skin skill from the toad. Capacity 52%. Acceptable. He passed the poison spike to Yuri. Capacity 44%. Yuri could now poison her weapon by touch. She tested it on a tree. The bark blackened and crumbled. Yuri looked at her fingers with the respect she usually reserved only for a fine blade. On the 3rd day, Minjae called a council meeting again. He laid out a plan. Do not attack the pack. Lure out the leader. Ogres obey the leader for one reason. He is stronger. If you challenge the leader on his territory, he will come out himself. Pride. Ogres are stupid, but proud. And if the leader comes out of the cave into the open, he can be lured away from the pack. Yuri asked how exactly. Minjae said that for this, a lure was needed. Something that the ogre wants badly enough to abandon his guard and go after it himself. Saru said quietly that she knew what attracted old ogres. Seeds of evolution. An old ogre who hasn't grown in a long time will be obsessed with the scent of a stranger's seed, especially if it's potent. It's instinct, the hunger for growth. Minjae looked at her, then at his hands. He was a walking seed bank, 5 foreign skills inside. He reeked of power the way a meat truck reeks of scent to a hungry dog. He was the perfect bait. Yuri realized this at the same time as he did, and said no. Minjae said this wasn't a discussion, but a plan. Yuri stood up. She said it wasn't a plan, but suicide. Minjae replied calmly that suicide was sitting in a burrow and waiting for them to be found. The ogres from the camp were still searching for the escaped slave. Sooner or later, they would reach this forest, and then there would be not 1 leader, but 30 ogres at the threshold of their burrow. Yuri fell silent. She knew he was right. She just didn't want to admit it. Minjae continued. The plan wasn't to fight the chieftain one-on-one. The plan was to lure him into a trap. He explained. Between the forest and the hills, there is a gorge. Yuri knew it. Narrow, stone walls on either side, the bottom strewn with boulders. A gorge a 1/4 hour's walk long. The leader would fit, but it would be hard for him to turn around. 4 meters tall in a 3-meter passage. Minjae would lead the leader into the gorge. Yuri would wait on the cliffs above. Saru would be at the entrance to the gorge and would block the way back. Exactly how she would block it was the question. Saru thought for a moment and said she could use her fog ability through her staff. She wouldn't be able to become invisible, but she could create a strip of thick fog that would disorient the ogres if they tried to follow the leader into the gorge. Minjae nodded. Not ideal, but good enough. They'd been preparing for a week. Yuri would go out to the gorge and study every rock, every ledge, every crevice. She found 3 spots up high from which they could strike and which the ogre couldn't reach. Minjae trained. He ran through the forest. He practiced dodging. He activated his bone armor consciously, not all over his body, selectively, on his forearms, on his ribs. He was learning to allocate his skill like a budget, not to spend it all at once. Saru practiced creating fog with her staff. Every day it turned out a little better. The band of fog became thicker and wider. It lasted up to 10 minutes. Not much, but enough.
On the 7th day they set out. Minjae led the way. Yuri was 50 paces to the right. Seru brought up the rear. The hills appeared around noon on the 2nd day. Bare, rocky. The smell of ogres hit them even without a heightened sense of smell. Heavy and sour. Minjae stopped at the entrance to the gorge and looked at his companions. Yuri nodded and started climbing up the rock face, quickly and confidently. Brute strength and tough skin made her an excellent climber. Seru stood at the entrance, a staff in her hands, her face pale. But her hands didn't tremble. Minjae turned toward the hills. He took a deep breath and set off. Alone, across the open space, toward the territory of 30 ogres. He didn't hide. He walked tall and let his seeds glow. Acidic slime, bone armor, poisonous skin, the skill of mist. 4 alien powers within a body that made no attempt to hide. The first ogres spotted him a minute later. 2 young ones. They roared and ran toward him. Minjae didn't run. He stood and waited. When they were 20 paces away, the ground shook. A roar, so low that Minjae felt it not with his ears but with his ribs. The vibration ran through his entire body. The young ogres stopped, froze, and backed away. Something enormous was coming down the hill. 4 meters. No, closer to 5. A body like a moss-covered rock, arms down to the knees. The head was small relative to the body and buried in the shoulders. The eyes were red and burning. The leader. He was walking straight toward Minjae, and with every step, the ground shook. Minjae could smell it. Hunger. An ancient, dull hunger. The leader sensed his seeds and wanted them. Minjae turned and ran toward the gorge. The leader roared and charged after him. The ground shook. Rocks crumbled. Minjae flew so fast his feet barely touched the ground. The entrance to the gorge. He flew inside. The walls closed in on either side. The leader burst in after him. His shoulders scraped against the rock. He charged forward like a train in a tunnel. Minjae ran through the gorge, weaving between the boulders. The leader smashed the boulders with his chest. Stone chips flew in all directions. Then Yuri struck from above. A stick with a poisoned tip pierced the leader's shoulder. He roared and raised his arm. Yuri leaped back along the rock face. The leader tried to turn around. The walls wouldn't let him. He was stuck for a second. Minjae turned around. Acidic slime. He hadn't known how to activate it consciously until that moment. But his body knew. His palms were covered in a greenish film. He struck the leader's leg with both hands. The slime dug into the skin. The smell of burnt flesh. The leader roared and kicked him away. Minjae flew into the wall of the gorge. The bone armor took the blow. His ribs held firm, but the air was knocked from his lungs and his vision darkened. Yuri struck again, from above, into the neck. The poison tip sank deep. The poison flowed through the leader's veins, and Minjae saw the creature twitch. It slowed down. The poison was working. But slowly. The leader was too big. Too resilient. He lunged forward, and his arm knocked down the rock ledge Yuri was standing. She managed to jump. Barely. Rocks rained down, and Yuri tumbled down the slope. Minjae got to his feet. His body screamed in pain, but he stood. The mist skill. He activated it for the first time in battle. Mist poured out of him like steam from a kettle, thick and white.
The gorge was shrouded in seconds. The leader roared and began lashing out blindly. His fists shattered the rock. But Minjae was not where the leader was striking. He moved through the gorge silently. The mist hid him. He tracked the leader by scent, by vibration, by sound. He approached from behind, acidic slime on both hands, a leap onto its back, hands on the nape of its neck. The slime burned the leader's skin, and it roared and thrashed. Yuri appeared from the fog on the left. A stick to the leader's eye. He wheezed. Minjae held on. The slime burned. The poison slowed him down. Yuri struck. Again and again. The leader fell to his knees, then onto his side. The gorge shuddered. Minjae slid off the carcass and lay on the rocks, breathing heavily. The leader was still wheezing. Big, tough, but finished. Yuri stepped forward and drove the stick into his throat. The wheezing stopped. Silence. Only water dripping from the gorge walls and two people breathing heavily. System. Target detected. Wish to steal. Minjae lay there, staring at the flickering line. The card flipped open before he could answer. Like a preview. Seismic strike. Mid-rank. Mid-rank. First. Affinity 82%. Capacity after theft will be 68%. High. But mid-rank is worth it. I wish. Heat. The small ogres scattered over 2 days. Without a leader, they became what they truly were. Dull loners without a purpose. Yuri tracked them. Some went north, some to the east. A few of the smallest ones simply sat down by the stream and stayed there. Like workers whose boss had been taken away, leaving them without instructions. Minjae looked at them and thought, they aren't dangerous. Not now. Dumb, hungry, uncoordinated. The 3 ogres by the stream hadn't hunted in 2 days, and were chewing on grass that was obviously inedible to them. Yuri said they should finish them off. Minjae said, no. Yuri turned to him. Her face was hard. She said the ogres had killed her tribe, that they eat people, that leaving them meant leaving a threat. Minjae replied that he remembered that, but 3 stupid, hungry ogres chewing on grass weren't a threat. They were a resource. Yuri stared at him as if he'd spoken in a language that didn't exist. Minjae explained. Ogres are strong, physically stronger than any human by several times. If they can be subjugated, they will become a labor force. Walls, fortifications, hauling cargo. 3 ogres replace 30 men on a construction site. Yuri said that ogres don't obey. They obeyed the leader because he could kill them. Minjae nodded. So he needs to become the leader for these 3. Not to kill. Subjugate. He walked up to the stream. The 3 ogres saw him and leaped to their feet. A little over 2 meters tall. Youngsters. They growled, but uncertainly. Minjae stood calmly. Then he punched a boulder next to the stream. A seismic shock. The stone split in half. The ground beneath the ogres' feet. They recoiled. Their eyes grew wide. They sensed power. A mid-tier skill. A power greater than their leaders. Minjae pointed at the ground and growled. The word he'd heard at the camp when the leader gave orders. Sit. 2 ogres sat down immediately. The 3rd one hesitated. Minjae looked at him. Just looked. The 3rd one sat down. Yuri stood behind Minjae with her stick at the ready. She didn't approve, but she didn't interfere.
Minjae took some stag meat out of his bag, leftovers. He tossed a piece to each ogre. They grabbed it and started devouring it. Minjae turned and walked away. The ogres watched him go. Then they finished the meat. Then they hobbled after him. Yuri quietly said that he was either a genius or a madman. Minjae replied that in the warehouse, those two things usually came as a package deal. The three ogres latched onto them like stray dogs. Dumb, timid, but obedient. Minjae fed them. He gave orders using simple words and gestures. Fetch, dig, sit. They obeyed, not out of love, out of fear and hunger. As long as that was enough. Minjae began to think about the fortress. The burrow under the roots was a refuge, but not a home, not a base. 3 people and 3 ogre wouldn't fit in a hole, and if others joined them, and Minjae believed they would, they'd need a place, a real place, with walls, with a roof, with a perimeter. Yuri showed him a rocky outcrop at the edge of the forest in the hills, a natural amphitheater, stone walls on 3 sides, open only to the south, a stream inside, an area 200 by 100 meters. Minjae surveyed it, and a light went on inside him. This was the storekeeper's place, which he knew as no one. When you stand in an empty warehouse and see not emptiness, but structure. Here are the shelves. Here is the receiving area. Here is shipping. He saw walls where there were none yet. Gates, towers, a smithy, a warehouse, barracks, an infirmary, a kitchen. Everything in his head, clear and distinct. He put the ogres to work that very day. Stones, logs, clay. The ogres hauled boulders that 3 men couldn't lift even with 6 of them. Minjae showed them where to place them. Yuri watched this and shook her head, but she helped. She chopped trees into beams. Her strength after the blood seal allowed her to fell trunks that had previously been beyond her strength. Seru was busy with other things. She gathered herbs around the new camp, dried them, prepared concoctions, healing ointments, compresses, something for fever, something for infected wounds. Minjae set aside a corner for her under a rocky overhang and said that this was her infirmary. Seru looked at the empty corner with its stone floor and a blanket of animal skins. Then she nodded quietly and began to lay out her supplies. 3 days later, a wall appeared, rough, crooked, made of boulders held together with clay, 2 human heights tall. It blocked the southern entrance to the amphitheater. Not completely, with an opening for a gate that wasn't there yet. But the wall stood. The first wall. Minjae stood in front of it and watched. Yuri approached. She said the wall was crooked, and that the ogres had laid the stones crookedly, and that the wind would knock it down in a month. Minjae agreed. Crooked. The ogres are clumsy. But it stands. Yesterday it was empty here, and today there is a wall. Tomorrow will be better. Yuri snorted but didn't leave. She stood nearby and looked at the wall too. On the 4th day, people came. Minjae heard them before he saw them. Noise in the forest, crackling branches, voices, frightened, quiet. Yuri grabbed a stick. Minjae raised his hand. We'll wait. 5 people emerged from the forest. 3 women, 1 old man, 1 child of about 10. Dirty, ragged, so thin they were almost transparent. They stopped at the wall and looked up at it. Then they saw the ogres behind the wall. The child clung to the old man. The old man stepped back. One of the women stepped forward, tall, with burned hands. She wasn't looking at the ogres, at the wall,
and at Minjae, who was standing in front of the opening. She asked who he was. Minjae said he was a builder. She asked why the ogres weren't eating him. Minjae said they worked for him. The woman was silent for a long time. Then she said their village had burned down 3 days ago. A clan of lizards had passed through their territory and burned everything that would burn. They had wandered aimlessly.
They saw the wall and thought it would be safe here.
Minjae looked at them. 5 of them, barely alive, useless in battle. The old man can barely stand. The child is too scared to speak. The women are exhausted. In the warehouse, this would be a pallet of damaged goods. Substandard. Write-off. But Minjae never wrote people off. He told them to come in. Yuri flinched. She looked at him. He knew what she wanted to say. Extra mouths to feed. Food. No room. Every new person is a burden on a system that's already cracking. Minjae said quietly, 5 people means 5 pairs of hands. The old man can mend clothes and teach the child. The women can gather food and help on the construction site. A burden becomes a resource if distributed correctly. Yuri said nothing. The 5 entered. Minjae assigned them that very evening. He seated the woman with the burned hands next to Sero. She introduced herself as Baek Do-hee. Minjae saw her hands up close. The burns were a mix of old and fresh. And neat. Worked. They were the hands of a blacksmith. She stuttered when she spoke and avoided eye contact. But when Minjae gave her a stone and asked her to chip away the edge, she did it in 3 strokes. Precisely. Confidently. Her hands didn't tremble. He looked at her. A blacksmith. A real blacksmith. Among refugees who could barely breathe. It was like finding an industrial machine in a junkyard. He told Do-hee that he needed a smithy. That she needed a smithy. That he would find her materials and build her a workspace. Do-hee looked up. There was so much distrust in her eyes that Minjae could almost physically feel it. She said that blacksmiths aren't asked what they want. Blacksmiths are forced to work. Minjae said that things were different here. Do-hee didn't answer. But the next morning, she was already clearing a space by the far wall of the amphitheater. Without being asked. Without being ordered. She was simply clearing a spot for the smithy. Minjae worked every day from dawn until the ogres hauled stones, the people mixed clay. The wall grew taller and thicker. Yuri went hunting and brought back meat. Saru treated and looked after everyone's health, including the ogres. She discovered that one of the ogres was limping, an old fracture that had healed crookedly. She applied a splint and wrapped it with bast. The ogre watched the small woman bandaging his leg and didn't move. Not out of fear, out of incomprehension. He had never been treated. He had never been touched at all without the intent to cause pain. Minjae saw this and remembered. A week later, more people arrived. 7 of them, from another ruined village. Then 4. Then 12 in a single group. Women, children, old people. Few hunters, almost no fighters. But hands, heads, eyes that saw and legs that walked. Minjae accepted them all. He asked each one the same thing. What can you do? Some knew how to sew hides. Some knew herbs. One old man turned out to be a bone carver. One woman was a skilled fisherwoman. Minjae assigned them their places, like goods on shelves. A place for everyone. A task for everyone. A purpose for everyone. The fortress's population grew to 34 people in 3 weeks, plus 3 guards. The fount was finished. A gate made of bound tree trunks stood in the opening. Inside, the areas were divided. The living quarters under a rocky overhang, the food storage, Seru's infirmary, Dohi's work area, where she was already hammering away at stone and bone, making tools from whatever was at hand. A communal fire in the center. Minjae stood on the wall and looked down at the camp from above. 34 people, 3 fences, a wall, a roof. Food for 3 days. This wasn't what he'd planned when he'd been lying in the mud of the camp over 2 weeks ago. He'd planned to survive. But what he ended up with was a fortress. Small, crooked, fragile, but a fortress. Yuri climbed up to him on the wall. She said she'd seen tracks to the south.
Big ones. Not ogres. Something else. Minjae asked what exactly. Yuri replied that she didn't know. 3-toed tracks. Deep. With scorch marks along the edges. Something that leaves a trail of fire as it walks. Minjae was silent. Then he asked, how far away? Yuri said 2 days' march. Maybe 3. But the tracks were heading their way. Minjae nodded. A new threat. Or a new target. Or both. He climbed down from the wall and walked over to Sir. Minjae hadn't slept all night. He sat on the wall and stared into the darkness to the south. A fire salamander. Above average rank. It was a creature he couldn't kill with his current setup. His 4 skills were geared toward close combat and stealth. Bone armor, acid slime, poisonous skin. The mist skill. Against a fire creature, half of these are useless. The fog would burn out. Acid slime might not pierce the skin of a creature that lives in flames. The armor was bone, and bone burns. That left poisonous skin and seismic shock. The poison works through contact. If the salamander's skin is red hot, touching it means burning your hand to the bone. The seismic shockwave hits the ground, not the body. It can knock it off its feet, but not kill it. Minjae calculated, and every calculation ended the same way. It wasn't enough. He lacked resources. He lacked the necessary level. He lacked people with combat skills. 34 refugees. 1 fighter. 1 shaman. 3 ogres. Against the salamander, this was expendable material, not an army. At dawn, he called a council. Yuri. Seru. Dohi. The 4th person he called was an old man named Cho. The bone carver turned out to be more than just a craftsman. He remembered old stories, legends, maps. He knew the forest within a 2 days' march and remembered things the young had long forgotten. Minjae described the situation. A fire salamander. 2 or 3 days. It's coming toward them. He asked each of them what they knew. Yuri said she had seen the fiery creature once, far away. It had burned a patch of forest just by passing through it. The trees burst into flames from its body. The creature was about 6 meters long. Short, broad, 4 legs, a short, thick tail, a mouth full of teeth behind which flames burned. Seru said that fire creatures were vulnerable to water. Not just any water, to flowing, cold water. The river could slow it down, cool it off, make its hide brittle, but not for long. Dohi was silent. Then she said quietly that she could make a weapon. If there was material. She needed metal, or the leader's bone, something strong. Minjae looked at her. The leader's bones.
The ogre leader they killed in the gorge. They left the carcass behind. The bones are still lying there. The bones of a mid-rank creature. This isn't just bone. It's material imbued with power. Old Man Cho raised his hand. He said in a hoarse voice that there was a lake to the northeast. Deep. Cold. A river flows out of it, heading south through the forest.
If they lure the salamander to the river, they can use the water.
Minjae listened, and a plan took shape in his mind. Not one plan. 3 parallel operations. First, the leader's bones. Dohee needs the material. Yuri and he will go into the gorge and drag the bones out. The ogres will help carry them. Second, the river. We need reconnaissance. Where exactly the riverbed runs, how deep it is, how wide, current speed. Is there a place where the river can be dammed or diverted? Third, the trap. Don't worry, the trap. Like with the leader, only more complicated. You can't kill a salamander with brute force. You have to weaken it, cool it down, and then finish it off. Minjae assigned the tasks. Yuri and he are going for the bones. Seru is scouting the river. 2 of the refugees who know how to navigate the forest will go with her. Dohee is preparing the forge for work. Cho is gathering everyone who can dig and carry stones. Minjae said he needs a moat, in front of the wall, a deep one, wide. Cho looked at him and asked why. Minjae replied that they would fill the moat with water from the stream. It wouldn't stop the salamander, but it would slow it down. It would buy them time. Cho nodded and went off to organize the work. Minjae watched him go. The old man moved slowly but surely. He didn't ask why or how. He saw the wall. He saw the people behind it. He saw that someone was finally building instead of running. That was enough. Minjae and Yuri went out to the gorge that same morning. 3 ogres followed them, carrying bundles of ropes twisted from bark. Yuri was silent the whole way. Minjae walked and thought. Halfway there, Yuri spoke up. She said the salamander would kill them all. Minjae replied that it was possible. Yuri asked, "Then what was the point? What was the point of building a wall? What was the point of taking in refugees? What was the point of wasting energy if everything would burn down in 2 days?" Minjae walked in silence for a few minutes. Then he answered,
Because if we don't build, it's already burned down. If we don't gather people, they're already dead. If we don't try, the result is guaranteed. 0. But if we try, the result is unknown. And the unknown is better than a guaranteed 0. Yuri was silent for a long time. Then she said he was strange. Minjae agreed. The gorge greeted them with the stench of decay. The leader's carcass had swollen in the heat, and small scavengers circled around it. When the humans and ogres appeared, the scavengers scattered. Minjae examined the carcass. The meat was rotten, but the bones were intact. Massive. Solid. When he tapped the shin bone with his fist, it rang out. Like metal. The bones of a mid-tier monster. Stronger than steel, lighter than stone. The perfect material for weapons and armor. They stripped the skeleton in half a day. The ogres tore off the ribs and piled them up. Minjae selected the best ones. Shin bones, ribs, vertebrae. A jawbone with fangs, each fang as long as a palm and sharp as a knife. They tied the bones together, and the ogres hauled them back, loaded down like mules. The ogres didn't complain.
They never complained. Minjae realized that ogres had no concept of unfair labor. The strong give orders. The weak obey. For them, that was the law of the world. As long as Minjae was stronger, they worked. If he grew weak, they would devour him. Simple math. So he couldn't grow weak. When they returned, Dohi saw the bones and her eyes lit up. Minjae had seen that glow before, in the tech's warehouse when a new shipment of equipment arrived. A greedy, professional hunger. Dohi took a shin bone in her hands and ran her fingers over the surface. She said without a single hesitation that the material was superb. The density was perfect. The fibers were structured. She could make anything she needed from this. Minjae took note. When Dohi spoke about her work, her stutter disappeared. He gave her a list. 2 blades, spearheads, 6 of them. Plates for gauntlets. Minjae described each item. A blade for Yuri, a composite one, fitted to her grip. She holds a knife with a reverse grip and strikes from bottom to top, so the blade is curved, weighted toward the hilt. Dohi listened and nodded. Minjae described the second blade, for himself. Straight, short, more of a tool than a weapon. He doesn't need a sword. He needs something he can use to stab precisely and quickly at vulnerable spots. Dohi went into the smithy, and from there the sound of hammering and grinding carried out until late into the night. Seru returned from reconnaissance. There was a river, a 2-hour walk to the southwest. Wide, cold. The depth in the center was chest-high for an adult. The banks were gentle. The current was moderate. And most importantly, in one place, the river flowed through a narrow, rocky channel between 2 rocky outcrops. A natural bottleneck. Minjae listened and smiled. A bottleneck. A funnel. He knew how to work with funnel. In a warehouse, a bottleneck is a problem. In tactics, a bottleneck is a weapon. He laid out the entire plan. The salamander is coming from the south. That means it will cross the river. At that moment, it will be in the water. Slowed down. Cooled. If we keep it in the water long enough, its skin will cool and become vulnerable. To do this, we need to dam the river upstream of the bottleneck. Raise the water level. Create a flood zone. When the salamander enters the bottleneck, water will pour down from above. Not a trickle, a torrent. Yuri asked who would lure it in. Minjae said he would. Yuri said that it had already become a tradition. Minjae shrugged. He has the fog and seismic shock skills. He can attract attention and get away. The others can't. The next 2 days were hell. Everyone worked. Everyone, without exception. The ogres hauled stones to the river and built a dam. The refugees dug a moat in front of the fortress wall. Dohi hammered away without stopping. Seru prepared potions, healing and combat ones. She found a root that, when burned, produced thick, suffocating smoke. Not for the salamander, for a retreat if things went wrong. Minjae rushed between the work sites, checking, counting, making adjustments. The dam had to hold the pressure. He calculated the thickness and height. The ogres laid the stones, and he directed them exactly where to place them, every stone in its proper place, like boxes on a shelf. Old Man Cho proved indispensable. He knew where to get clay to seal the joints. He knew which trees bend rather than break and are suitable for the framework. He remembered how his grandfathers used to build them. Not on salamanders, on stag beetles. But the principle was the same. A channel, a funnel, a strike at the point of compression. By the evening of the second day, the dam stood. Rough, crooked, but it held the water. The level behind it rose by a meter.
The mouth downstream was partially flooded. Not ideal. Mind would have liked 2 meters of depth. But a meter is a meter. Dohi brought the weapons. Minjae took Yuri's blade and turned it over in his hands. He didn't know much about weapons, but he knew his tools. This blade was a tool. A curved blade made from the leader's bone, white and gray. So sharp that Minjae cut himself just by running his finger along the edge. The hilt was wrapped in strips of hide. It balanced perfectly in the palm of his hand when held in a reverse grip. Minjae held out Yuri's blade. She took it, gripped it. She twirled it, and froze. She looked at the blade, then at her hand, then at the blade again. Minjae saw her lips tremble. She said quietly that this knife was made for her. Not for just anyone. For her. Minjae nodded. He said that it wasn't just a knife. It was her knife. There was a difference. Yuri didn't answer. She turned away and Minjae thought her eyes were shining. But he didn't check. Morning of the 3rd day. Minjae stood on the fortress wall and looked south. The forest was burning. Not all of it. A thin strip of smoke rose a kilometer or 2 away. The trees were bursting into flames one after another. The line of fire moved slowly, but steadily. The salamander was coming. Minjae climbed down. He gave orders. All non-combatants are to retreat to the fortress. The wall, the moat. Dohi remains inside and keeps order. Cho commands the men. If the wall catches fire, extinguish it with wet hides. The combat group advances toward the river. Minjae, Yuri, Seru. 3 ogres, 6 units, against a fire salamander of above average rank. Minjae didn't bother thinking about the odds. Odds are for those who have options. He had no options. They walked toward the river in silence. Yuri in front, a new blade on her hip. Minjae behind her, a short bone knife in his hand. Seru with a staff. The ogres behind with spears made from the leader's ribs. The spears were crude, but sharp. The tips were made from fangs. Minjae instructed the ogres in simple words. Strike from above. Don't go near the head. Aim for the side. If it catches fire, run to the water. The ogres nodded. Minjae didn't know if they understood or not, but they nodded. The river. The gorge. The dam upstream held back the water. The water level in the gorge was above the ankles. Not much, but when the dam breaks, everything will rush out. Minjae positioned his men. Yuri on the rock to the right, high up, with a poisoned blade. Seru on the left bank with a staff. Her task is to destroy the dam at the right moment. One precise blow with the staff against the keystone, and the water will flow. The ogres are in ambush behind the rocks downstream. When the salamander is in the water, they'll strike from the sides with spears. Minjae stood in the narrows, ankle deep in icy water. Alone, in plain sight. Bait. They waited an hour. Then the smell of burning filled the air. Strong. The forest on the south bank began to smoke. The trees crackled. And she emerged. 6 meters. Yuri was right. Its body was low and broad. 4 thick paws. Its hide was dark red with cracks from which an orange glow seeped. Like lava. Its head was flat. Its eyes were 2 yellow flames. Its mouth was closed, but smoke seeped through its teeth. The ground beneath her hissed,
The grass flared. The salamander saw Minjae and stopped. She looked at him. She was in no hurry. She was a predator who had spent her entire life at the top of her food chain. She wasn't used to being afraid. Minjae stood in the water and looked into her eyes. His heart was pounding. His hands were wet with sweat and river water. He activated a seismic strike and punched the rocky riverbed. A crack ran through the riverbed. Water shot up in a fountain. The rocks shook. The salamander twitched and lunged at him. Minjae turned and ran up the river's narrowest point, upstream. Water lashed at his legs. The salamander burst into the gorge after him. Its paws entered the water and there was a hissing sound. Steam, thick and white. The water around its paws boiled, but its paws slowed. The skin on its lower body darkened. It lost its glow. The water was working. Minjae screamed, "Seru, now!" From the left bank, he saw a flash of silver light. Seru struck the keystone of the dam with her staff. The stone flew out, and the wall of water crashed down. Not a stream, not a torrent, a wave. A meter-high wall of icy water crashed into the throat and completely engulfed the salamander. The creature roared. The sound was such that something burst in Minjae's left ear, and the world went half silent. Steam rose in a wall. Minjae couldn't see a thing, but he could feel it. The creature thrashed in the water. The gorge wouldn't let it turn around. Water poured and poured. The ogre struck. Minjae heard the blows of spears against something hard. A roar. A crunch. One of the ogres screamed, not a battle cry, a scream of pain. Minjae activated the fog and rushed into the steam. He was knee-deep in hot water. He found the salamander by sound and smell. It was lying on its side. One side had cooled and darkened. The other was still glowing. One ogre lay nearby, burned to the bone, dead. Two others were striking the cooled side with their spears. The skin was cracking. Yuri jumped on top. The blade entered the crack in the skin, deeply. The salamander twitched. Poison from the blade flowed into the wound. Minjae ran up, acidic slime on both hands. He shoved his hands into the crack in the hide next to Yuri's blade, and the slime flowed inside, into the salamander's body. The creature thrashed. The hide burst in several places. It was losing heat, and with it, strength. The second ogre drove his spear into its throat. The third struck it on the head. The salamander wheezed. It twitched. It slowed down. Then it fell silent. The river's mouth grew quiet. Only the water hissed on the cooling carcass, and the living breathed heavily. Minjae stood knee-deep in the water. His hands were red from burns. His right palm was scalded. The acid slime had provided some protection, but the heat was too intense. He looked at the carcass and at the dead ogre beside it. His first loss. The system flashed. Target detected. Do you wish to steal? The card flipped open. Fire breath. Above average rank. Affinity 77%. Capacity after theft 89%. Minjae froze. 89%. Critical zone. Mutation. Loss of sanity. He stood and stared at the number. 89. Red zone. If he steals it, the scales will return. And not just the scales.
his brain would start to change. Seru had told him, first abstract thoughts, then concrete ones, then a name. He might lose himself. But the fire-breathing skill was above average. That was what would give his fortress firepower. That was what could be passed on through the blood seal. Yuri, with fire-breathing and a poisonous blade, will become a fighter even serious beasts will fear. Minjae made his decision in 3 seconds. I desire it. Heat, familiar, but 10 times stronger, as if a blast furnace had been lit inside him. He fell to his knees in the water, and the water around him hissed. His body was ablaze. Scales erupted on his hands instantly, on his neck, behind his ears. His nails curled and turned black. His teeth ached, and he felt his fangs lengthen by a millimeter. The system screamed in red. Capacity 89%. Critical overload. Mutation stage 3. Immediate unloading recommended. Minjae knelt in the water and clenched his teeth. His head was spinning. His thoughts were jumbled. For a second he forgot where he was. Then he forgot why. Then something cold touched his forehead. A staff. Seru stood before him, knee-deep in the water, pressing the staff against his head. Light, silvery and cold. It flowed through his skull, and things became clearer to Minjae. Not completely, but enough. He looked at Seru. She was as white as paper, and her hands were shaking. But she held the staff steady. Minjae said hoarsely, the salamander's body hadn't been wasted. Minjae ordered the ogres to drag the carcass to the fortress. 6 meters of dead fiery creature is a ton of materials. Skin, bones, teeth, the glands that generated the flame. Dohi saw the carcass and was speechless for a second. Then she walked around the salamander. She touched the hide. She tapped the bones. She peered into the mouth. And she said, evenly and clearly, without a single stutter, that from this she could arm 20 people. Minjae nodded. That was exactly what he needed. The refugees watched the carcass from behind the wall. More than 30 pairs of eyes. Minjae felt their gazes. Not just curiosity. Something else. Something he hadn't seen in those eyes before. Faith. Small. Fragile. Like a sprout through a crack in the stone. But faith. They saw that the wall they were building wasn't useless. That people with skills could kill the creature they had previously only fled from. That it was possible not just to survive. It was possible to win. Minjae didn't make any speeches. He didn't know how, and he didn't like it. Instead, he assigned tasks. Cut up the carcass, skin it and stretch the hide out to dry. Sort the bones by size. Carefully cut out the glands and give them to Seru for study. The meat. The meat was a problem. A fire salamander. Its flesh is saturated with heat. The raw meat was still hot to the touch even a day after death. Seru checked it and said the meat was edible, but unpredictable. It might grant the eater a tiny bit of fire resistance, or it might burn them from the inside. It depends on who eats it. Minjae made a decision. The meat goes into the communal pot, in small portions. Simmer it for a long time. Mix it with other meats and roots. Serve it little by little. Watch for reactions. If anyone feels sick, stop. Seru approved the approach. On the 3rd day after the battle with the salamander, they held a communal dinner. Minjae insisted. Everyone, humans and ogres, around one fire, around one pot. The ogres sat on the ground and stared at the pot in confusion. They always ate separately, raw, off the ground. Minjae handed out bowls to everyone, bowls carved by Old Man Cho from stag antler. Each bowl was sized to fit a hand. The ogres got the large ones. The humans got the small ones. The child got the smallest one, with a handle shaped like an animal that Cho had carved just for fun, because he felt like it. Minjae sat by the fire and ate. The meat was strange, warm even after it had cooled, with a slight tingling on the tongue, but filling. He watched as the larger of the two remaining ogres picked up a bowl and turned it in his paws. The bowl was tiny in his fingers. The ogre sniffed the stew. Then he carefully brought it to his mouth and took a sip. He froze, took another sip, and stared silently into the bowl. Minjae didn't know what the ogre was thinking, if he was thinking at all, but he saw how a creature that had spent its whole life gnawing on raw meat off the ground was drinking hot soup from a bowl for the first time, and how a huge, ugly paw held that bowl gently. The morning after the communal dinner, Minjae woke up and stepped out from under the canopy, and stopped. Two figures stood at the fortress gates. Not humans, not ogres. Two creatures the size of large dogs, six-legged, armored, horned, young. They stood at the gate and sniffed the air. Not aggressive, hungry. The smell of food from the fortress had reached the forest. Minjae slowly approached. The horned creatures backed away but did not run off. He took out a piece of dried meat and tossed it on the ground in front of them. One grabbed it. The second waited until the first had finished, then approached the second piece. Hierarchy, even among small creatures. Minjae fed them for 3 days. On the 4th, they entered the gate on their own. On the 5th, they slept by the fence right next to him. The ogre didn't mind. A pack was forming, not of equals, from different ones, humans, ogres, horned ones, each in their place, each with a function. Minjae didn't call it an army. He called it a staffing chart. 2 days after taming the horned ones, Siru called for him. She was sitting in the infirmary, and before her lay the fire glands of a salamander. 3 of them, fist-sized, dull orange, warm. Siru said she had studied them and that they weren't just organs. They were concentrated seeds. Not skills. Energy. Pure. If she embedded one of them into the staff, the power of the focuser would triple. She would be able to perform the blood seal faster and with less risk. And she'll be able to do something new. Diagnostics. She'll be able to see the seeds inside any creature from a distance, not just by touch. 10 to 15 paces away. Minjae immediately saw the value. Tactical reconnaissance. If Seru can see an opponent's skills before the fight, it changes everything. He asked what the risks were. Seru replied that the gland might be unstable. The wand might not hold up. Or she might get burned from the inside while calibrating it. Minjae thought about it. Then he asked if the metal could be stabilized with something. Dohi. If Dohi processed the metal and built it into the staff as a craftsman rather than a shaman. A frame for an unstable load. Like a cradle for fragile goods in a warehouse. Seru looked at him. Then she smiled slowly. The first smile he had ever seen on her face. She said it might work. Minjae called Dohi over. He explained the task. Dohi listened and said she needed a day. She finished it in half a day. A thin bone frame encased the gland like a cage. The gland sat snugly inside and did not touch the staff directly. Energy flowed through the bone bridges and was filtered. Seru inserted the structure into the tip of the staff.
The staff flared up. The silvery light grew brighter, and orange threads appeared within it. Warm and powerful. Saru took the staff and closed her eyes. Then she opened them and looked at Minjae. She said she could see his seeds, all 5 of them, clear and distinct. Then she turned toward the wall, toward the ogre sitting by the gate. She said she could see the ogre's seed. 1. Brute strength, lowest rank. She turned to Yuri, who was sharpening her blade by the fire. 3 seeds. Brute strength, thick hide, fire breath. Ranks from lowest to above average. Saru smiled. Not widely, just the corner of her mouth. But it was the smile of a person who, for the first time in her life, felt that her gift was not a weakness, but a tool. Minjae saw it and remembered it. Each of them was coming into their own. Yuri threw the blade under her hand. Saru threw the staff under her strength. Dohi threw the forge under her craftsmanship. Minjae didn't give them gifts. He gave them a place in the system where they were needed, just as they were. A week passed. The fortress was being fortified. The wall grew thicker. The moat deeper. Inside, partitions and shelters appeared. Dohi armed the people. Bone spears, shields made of salamanders stretched over frames made of ribs. Lightweight and heat-resistant. Minjae distributed the weapons. Not to everyone. Only to those who could and wanted to learn to fight. 12 out of 34 volunteered. Yuri trained them. Rigorously. Without mercy. But fairly. Minjae watched the training and saw something familiar. Trainees in their first month. Clumsy. Frightened. Dropping everything. But after a week, they start holding the tools correctly. After 2, they stop being afraid. After a month, they're workers, not trainees. It was the same here. Only spears instead of boxes. And blood instead of invoices. Minjae went hunting every other day. With Yuri. Sometimes with ogres. Small creatures in the area. He didn't take skills from every one, only from those with a kinship above 70% and a skill that fit into his system. The rest he killed for meat and materials. He kept the compatibility between 50 and 70%, the sweet spot. Below that, not enough power. Above that, dangerous. Every 5 to 7 days, he performed a blood seal with Saru. He transferred what he had accumulated. Yuri received combat skills. The ogres received what enhanced their nature. Minjae gave one of the ogres a bone armor. The ogre became a walking fortress. Slow, but nearly invulnerable to small creatures. Minjae stationed him at the gate, the first line of defense. A month had passed since Minjae woke up in the mud of the encampment. 1 month. The fortress stood. The population was growing. 41 people. 2 ogres. 2 horned giants. A wall, a moat, a smithy, an infirmary, an armory, a communal cauldron. Minjae stood on the wall and watched the sunset. Yuri stood beside him. She said more people were coming toward them. From the east, a large group. So Yanhua did not come as a refugee. She came as an inspector. 23 people behind her. Women, children, a few men. All ragged and hungry. But Yanhua herself walked with her head held high. Her eyes were cold and sharp. She surveyed the wall, the moat, the palisade at the gate, the rams in the courtyard, the men with bone spears. And she spoke her first words, addressed to Minjae. She said that the wall was built correctly, but the moat was too shallow, and the gate opened outward when it should open inward. Minjae looked at her, then at the gate, then back at her. He said she was right about the gate. Yanhua raised an eyebrow slightly. She was clearly expecting an argument, or offense, or an order to be silent. Minjae gave her neither of those, nor a third option. He gave her a question. He asked what else she saw. Yanhua was silent for 3 seconds. Then she began to speak. She spoke for 20 minutes without stopping. The firing angles from the wall are insufficient. We need projections for flanking. The food storehouse is located too close to the smithy. One spark and the supplies will burn. The infirmary has no emergency exit. The water supply comes from a single stream. If the enemy cuts off the stream, the fortress will hold out for 3 days. We need a well. We need an underground reservoir. We need a second inner wall. If the outer wall is breached, the inner wall will buy time for evacuation. Minjae listened, and each point fell into his mind like a piece of a puzzle he was assembling blindly. He knew logistics. He knew supply. But he didn't know fortification. He didn't know defensive tactics. He didn't know how to build a wall so it could be used for firing, not just standing there. Yanhua knew. Minjae asked where she learned it. Yanhua answered briefly. Her mother was an advisor to the chieftain of a large settlement in the west. Yanhua grew up listening to plans for defense and attack. She had been drawing maps since she was 7. She had been counting supplies and people since she was 12. She proposed a defense plan against the lizards to the chieftain when she was 16. The chieftain listened. He laughed and did things his own way. The lizards came a month later. The settlement fell overnight. Yanhua survived because she was on a reconnaissance. She returned to the ruins, gathered those who remained, and walked with them for a month until she heard about the wall and the one who had tamed the ogres. Minjae listened and saw. Not a refugee, not a victim. A commander whom no one listened to. A strategist who wasn't given a map. He said one thing. He said he needed that defense plan, and that he was the first to listen. Yanhua froze. Then her face twitched, quickly, almost imperceptibly. She pulled herself together in half a second and nodded. By evening, Minjae had given her a spot under a rocky overhang, a flat stone for drawing, charcoal for lines, bones for marking the scale, a cartography room, the first in this fortress. Yanhua spread a hide on the stone and began to draw. A map of the surroundings, the forest, the hills, the river, marshes to the south, mountains to the northwest. She drew from memory, and her memory was like a steel trap. Every landmark in its place. Every distance was precise. Minjae stood nearby and watched. Yanhua drew and explained. Here are clans of small creatures. This is lizard territory. This is a void. Too empty. Something massive cleared it out, and nothing has taken its place. Dangerous. Minjae asked what lay beyond the mountains to the northwest. Yanhua paused. She said quietly that beyond the mountains lay the territory of the third Fang, one of the 9 Great Ones, a territory that no human had ever seen and from which no one had ever returned. Rumors speak of wastelands where the earth is dead and nothing grows, where creatures roam that even other monsters avoid, and where the third Fang himself and his emissaries dwell. Minjae remembered. The third fang, the closest of the 9. The question isn't whether the third fang will reach them. The question is when. The next 2 weeks were the most intense since the fortress was founded. Yanhua reorganized everything. Minjae gave her full authority, and she didn't waste a single day. The gates were reinforced. The wall was reinforced with projections for flanking. They began digging a well. The storeroom was moved deep into the amphitheater under a rock overhang. They began erecting an inner wall. Yanhua commanded the construction like a general commands sappers. No shouting. No fuss. Clear orders and precise control. People obeyed. Not right away. In the early days, some grumbled that a woman was in charge. Yanhua didn't argue. She would approach the grumbler and ask if he had a better plan. If not, then let him dig. If he did, let him show it. No one did. Minjae watched and learned. He was a logistician. She was a strategist. He thought about supplies. She thought about defense. Together, they covered more ground than either of them could alone. They talked in the evenings, by the fire, when the others had gone to bed. Not about feelings, about the walls, about supplies, about how many days the fortress would hold under siege, about which resource was critical: water, food, weapons, people. Minjae said that people aren't a resource. Yanhua looked at him and replied that in war, people are a resource. Just the most valuable one. Minjae thought for a moment and said that in the warehouse, people are also a resource. But a good warehouse manager doesn't waste people. He spends time and materials so that people can work safely. Yanhua was silent for a long time. Then she said she liked the way he thought. It was a compliment. The first and only one from her. The fortress's population had reached 64. There were now 5 ogres. 3 new ones had come on their own. Dumb loners who'd lost their pack and were following the scent of food. Minjae accepted them just as he had the first ones. A show of strength, feeding, simple commands. There were now 6 horned beasts. They were multiplying. 2 females gave birth right in the fortress. Little horned beasts the size of cats ran between the humans' legs and got tangled up under the ogre's feet. Minjae watched this commotion and thought, an ecosystem. He wasn't building a fortress. He was building an ecosystem. Humans and monsters in the same space. With shared resources, with shared protection, with a shared cauldron. No one in the wildlands had ever done such a thing. Here, the strong devoured the weak, always, without exception. Minjae was making an exception, and every day that exception grew and grew stronger. But every day the moment drew nearer when those who could not tolerate exceptions would notice it. Yuri brought news from reconnaissance. The lizards in the southeast had become active. Their patrols were appearing closer, twice a week. They hadn't come before. They sensed growth. They sensed that something had appeared on their border that hadn't been there before. Minjae listened and asked Yanhua what she thought. Yanhua unfolded a map. She said the lizards wouldn't attack right away. They were scouting, testing the waters, gauging our strength. If they decided the fortress was weak, they would come. If they decided it was strong, they would send a negotiator. Lizards are smarter than ogres. They bargain. But their bargaining always ends the same way. They take more than they give. And eventually, they take everything. Minjae nodded. He knew suppliers like that. They start with a good price. Then the terms change.
Then you become dependent. Then they milk you dry. A classic scheme. He told Yanhua that they would accept the negotiator. They would listen, and then refuse. Yanhua raised an eyebrow. She asked what would happen when the lizardmen received the refusal. Minjae replied that by that point, they would have an army that would make the lizardmen think twice. Yanhua looked at him, then at the fortress. 64 men, 5 ogres, 6 horned ones. She said nothing, but in her eyes, Minjae saw calculation. She was calculating, estimating, building scenarios in her head. He recognized that look. He saw it in the mirror every day. That night, Minjae didn't sleep again. He stood on the wall and counted. He had 64 people. Of them, 12 were rookie fighters, 1 elite hunter, 1 shaman, 1 strategist, 1 blacksmith, 5 ogres. Hunting shadow wolves required preparation they hadn't had before. A pack. 15 individuals, a coordinated group of predators that hunted as a single organism. This wasn't a lone stag or a dim-witted ogre leader. It was a machine. Minjae respected machines. He had worked with them his entire previous life. Conveyors, sorting machines, loaders. A machine works as long as every part of it works. Break one part, and the machine stops. Which part is the key in a pack of wolves? The leader. Take out the leader, and the pack falls apart. But the leader is in the center of the pack. Getting to him means getting past 14 wolves with stealthy steps. Impossible. So we need to pull the leader out of the pack, or break the pack apart. Minjae called a meeting. 5 of them. Him, Yuri, Seru, Yanhua, Dohi. 5 heads over the map. Yanhua was sketching the wolves' territory based on Yuri's descriptions. A forest to the north. Dense, dark, little light. Perfect for shadow step. The wolves used the shadows of the trees to move. The denser the forest, the faster they move. Minjae latched on to this. Shadows. The skill works through shadows. What if we remove the shadows? Yuri looked up. She said they could set the forest on fire. Fire breath. She could create a line of fire that would remove the shadows in the area. Minjae shook his head. An uncontrolled fire. It would burn everything, including them. Yanhua suggested something else. Not fire, clearing. Clear the area of the forest down to bare ground. An open space without shadows. In an open area, the wolves won't be able to use shadow step. They'll become ordinary beasts. Fast and strong, but ordinary. Minjae considered it. Clearing a section of the forest. That's work. Days of work. But he has 5 ogres and 60 men. Dohi said quietly that she could make axes. From salamander bones, heat-resistant, durable. Minjae nodded. Yanhua continued. Clearing the clearing is half the battle. We need to lure the pack into this clearing. Wolves won't go into an open space voluntarily. They're predators. They're cautious. They need a reason. Minjae said there would be a reason. Him. Him again. Yuri flinched. She said he couldn't be the bait every time. Sooner or later, the bait would get eaten. Minjae replied that he had the fog skill. In an open space, the fog would give him cover that the wolves wouldn't have. They would lose their shadows. He would gain the fog. A mirror image. Yanhua added, not just a clearing with traps. Pits covered with branches, stakes at the bottom. Around the perimeter, fighters with spears, and Yuri on the high ground.
ogres on both sides like a wall, horned beasts with armor like moving shields. Minjae looked at the map and didn't see a clearing. He saw a warehouse, a receiving area, a processing area, a shipping zone. Goods enter through one door. They are processed. They exit through another. Or they don't. The plan was more complicated than anything they had done before. Preparation took 10 days. The ogres felled trees. The men dragged the trunks away. The clearing grew. 50 paces in diameter. Then 100. Minjae stopped at 120. Enough so that the shadows of the trees wouldn't reach the center. They dug the pits at night. 12 pits around the perimeter, as deep as a man is tall. Stakes made of stag antler at the bottom, branches and leaves on top. Yuri checked every pit personally. She knew what weight the covering could bear and what would break through. Dohi made the axes. And else. Minjae didn't ask, but she brought them. Bracers for herself, made from salamander bone, fitted precisely to her hands, to her burns, to her scars. The metal lay between the scars and didn't press on the sore spots. Minjae saw and understood. She had made herself protection, the first in her life, not on anyone's orders, by her own decision. He said nothing, just nodded. Dohi nodded back. On the 11th day, they were ready. Minjae stood at the edge of the clearing and looked north. The forest began with a wall of dark trunks 30 paces away. Somewhere out there, a pack was roaming. Siru sensed them at the edge of her range. 15 flickering dots. The leader in the center. His essence burned brighter than the rest. Minjae stepped into the forest. Alone. With a short bone knife and his mist skill at the ready. He walked, leaving a trail behind him. On purpose. Breaking branches. Stepping in the mud. He wanted them to find him. They found him an hour later. Minjae saw the first wolf out of the corner of his eye. A shadow darted between the trees. Large, black, silent. Then a second shadow on the left. A third behind him. They surrounded him. Minjae quickened his pace, toward the clearing. The wolves sped up too. They didn't attack. They were herding him, cornering him, guiding him, just like a pack of real wolves herds a deer. Minjae let them. Because they were driving him where he was going anyway, to the clearing. He burst out from under the trees into the open space. The sun hid his eyes. Not a single shadow. Bare earth, stumps, trampled ground. The wolves burst out after him and stopped. Minjae saw them freeze at the edge of the clearing. Black bodies pressed against the ground. Yellow eyes. They sensed a trap, but hunger and the thrill of the hunt were stronger than caution. The leader emerged from the forest, 1.5 times larger than the rest. His coat was not black, but dark gray with silver stripes. His eyes were not yellow, but white. 2 white fires in a dark muzzle. He looked at Minjae, and Minjae sensed his mind. Not a dull animal instinct. Intelligence. Cold and calculating. The leader knew it was a trap, and he walked in anyway. Because he was sure the trap wouldn't work on him. The pack surged forward. 14 wolves in the open. No shadows. No stealthy steps. Just fast, powerful beasts. The first 3 flew into the pits. A screech, a crunch. The stakes did their job. The rest circled around the pits and lunged at Minjae. He activated the fog. A white wall rose around him. The wolves burst into the fog and were lost. They couldn't see.
He could. He sensed them by scent and by the vibration of the earth. A seismic shock, a fist into the ground. A wave swept across the clearing and 4 wolves toppled over. Yuri crashed down from the high ground. Fire breath. A jet of flame swept over the heads of the fallen wolves, and 2 burst into flames. A shriek, the smell of burnt fur. The ogre struck from the flanks. Spears from the ribs of the ogre leader, heavy, long. Every strike pierced a wolf through and through. 12 militia fighters stood as a wall with spears and shields made of salamander hide. The wolves lunged at the wall and bounced back. Spears struck from behind the shields. The wolves died, one after another, quickly and gruesomely. But the leader did not take part in the slaughter. He stood at the edge of the clearing and watched. His white eyes were still and cold. He was waiting. Minjae understood. The leader wasn't an idiot. He had written off the pack. The 14 wolves were expendable. While they were dying, the leader was studying. Tactics, formation, abilities. He was learning. When the last ordinary wolf fell, the leader moved. He didn't run. He took a step and vanished. A shadow step. In an open clearing with no shadows. Minjae froze. It's impossible. There's no shadow. The skill shouldn't work. A blow to the back. Minjae flew forward. The bone armor absorbed the brunt of the force, but his ribs cracked. He rolled and jumped to his feet. The leader stood 3 steps away. His white eyes burned. Minjae understood. A shadow. His shadow. The shadow of his own body. The sun shone overhead, and everyone standing there had a shadow beneath their feet. Short. Small. But a shadow. The leader could jump over any shadow, even a tiny one. Yuri rushed toward them. The leader leaped over her shadow and ended up behind her. A paw strike to the ribs. Yuri flew backward. Her thick hide saved her from cuts, but the blow was like a hammer. Minjae activated the fog to maximum. Thick white fog flooded the clearing. The sun disappeared. The shadows vanished. Completely. The alpha growled. He was darting about in the fog, and Minjae could hear him. Agile, dangerous, but blind. In the shadowless fog, he was just a wolf. A big, strong wolf, but not a ghost. Minjae moved silently. Acidic slime on his hands. Poisonous skin activated. He approached from behind. He could smell it. The beast's hot breath. Musk. Anger. The knife went in under the shoulder blade. Deep. Acidic slime flowed into the wound. The poison from his skin seeped through the fur. The leader howled and spun around. Teeth clicked a centimeter from Minjae's face. He jumped back. Yuri appeared from the fog on the other side. A blade to the throat. A breath of fire. A jet of flame straight into the wound. The leader collapsed. He thrashed on the ground. The poison, acid, and fire burned him from the inside. Minjae stood nearby and waited. He didn't finish it off. He waited until the creature stopped twitching. Because approaching a dying predator meant approaching the most dangerous opponent. A wounded beast strikes hardest of all. The leader fell silent after a minute that felt like an hour. The fog was lifting. The clearing opened up. 14 dead wolves. 1 dead leader. Not a single casualty on Minjae's side. The wounded. Yuri with cracked ribs. Minjae passed Yuri's shadow step on to her 2 days later. Her capacity had dropped to 58%,
and the scales that had begun to appear on her neck had vanished. Yuri stood in the clearing and tested the skill. She stepped into her shadow and appeared in the shadow of a tree. She stepped back. And again, with each leap, the smile on her face grew wider. It was not a gentle smile. Predatory, hungry. The smile of a hunter who had obtained the perfect tool. She looked at Minjae and said he could keep it for himself. Minjae replied that he had the mist. He didn't need to jump through shadows. He needed her to jump. Yuri was silent. Then she turned away and jumped again. From shadow to shadow. Fast. Silent. Deadly. Minjae watched her and thought. Yuri with brute force. Tough skin. Fiery breath. Poisonous thorn. Shadow step. 5 skills ranging from low to mid-plus rank. She was the most dangerous fighter in the fortress. More dangerous than Minjae himself. And that was right. A logistician shouldn't be the strongest fighter. A strategist must be the one who places strong fighters in the right places. Upon returning to the fortress, Minjae discovered that more people had arrived during their absence. 11. And among them was a woman who changed everything. Han A-ryum.
Minjae saw her and didn't immediately realize who was standing before him. 19 years old, short, muscular. Her hair was tangled and cut short. Her eyes were large and dark, animal-like. Not a metaphor. She had vertical pupils. And when she turned her head, Minjae saw a strip of scales behind her ear. Thin, almost imperceptible, but scales. Half-breed, human and beast. She stood apart from the other 11. They didn't stand next to her. They stood far away from her. Minjae saw this and recognized the pattern. An outcast, needed by the group because she's useful, hated by the group because she's different. He walked up to her. Aram flinched, with her whole body, like a beast that had been beaten too often. Minjae stopped 3 steps away. He said his name was Minjae, and that everyone here had a place. Aram looked at him and didn't believe him. It was written all over her face. She had heard those words before, and every time, the words were followed by a kick, or a rock, or a shout, "Get out!" Minjae didn't try to convince her with words. He turned to Cho and told him to give her a bowl and a place by the fire. Cho nodded. Aram received a bowl. She ate quickly and greedily, like a hungry cub, covering her food with her hands. Minjae noticed how 2 of the new arrivals glanced at her, and one said something quietly. Impure. Minjae heard it. He approached the one who had spoken, calmly. He stood beside him and said in an even voice that in this fortress, ogres sat at the same pot as humans, that horned ones slept next to children, that there were no impure ones here. Here there were those who worked and those who ate the fruits of others' labor. And he asked which group the speaker belonged to. The man fell silent, swallowed, and turned away. Aram heard. Minjae saw her hand holding the bowl freeze, saw her vertical pupils dilate. She said nothing, but from that evening on, she followed him like a shadow,